What are some dark psychology facts, Story 1. Well, not dark, but OCD is pretty cruel. I have OCD, but I'm a lot better now than I was 10 years ago. Anyway, it's seriously such a cruel illness, especially when you logically know your compulsions or rituals. Logically won't change an outcome you fear, no matter what you do or don't do. Like, I logically knew, no, nothing bad will happen to someone I love if I don't wash my hands for 2 hours, or something to that effect. It's just a cruel disease. The logic is there, but the urge/thought/compulsion or ritual is still something you feel you need to do. True, my cousin has a severe case, won't take meds, won't see a psychiatrist. Watching him go from a smart, amazing person into a Neanderthal was just heartbreaking. I haven't seen him in 18 months. Story 2. This example of Kevin, a random normal guy who claimed to have lost all impulse control after a brain surgery and eventually was arrested for downloading CP in 2006. Radiolab did a great podcast on the subject. That's an interesting case because there has been some debate recently on if brain surgery was just being used as an excuse to try to wiggle out of serious jail time, and the doctor involved saw it as an opportunity to get funding for researchers. Obviously, we will probably never know for sure if he really did lose control, or if the whole story was made up to avoid jail time, and the stories are a rabbit hole that very quickly becomes hard to find solid facts on. Story 3. A depressed psychologist decided to study depression in animals. He created an experiment called the pit of despair. Baby monkeys who had bonded with their mothers were put into a lightless steel cage with sloping sides so they couldn't easily move or entertain themselves. They were fed and watered remotely so they didn't even interact with the researchers. Within days, they stopped moving completely. Some were alone in the dark for up to a year. Several starved themselves to death. When reintroduced to other monkeys, they couldn't function and were bullied and incapable of sexual relations. To see what sort of mothers they would be, he made a monkey setup because artificial insemination hadn't been invented. The monkeys subjected to this were cruel beyond imagining. One sat on its child's head and chewed its limbs off. Every monkey subjected to this was broken, and this research went on for decades. It produced no new scientific value beyond being an example of why researchers need ethical review of their work. Pit of despair. Story 4. 3 groups of children. Group A were congratulated when they spoke. Group B was criticized for the way they speak. Group C is a control group. Group A gained more confidence and improved their speech, while Group B got worse. I can't find the experiment. This study is a bit similar. An experiment on public speaking anxiety in response to 3 different types of virtual audience. Children of abusive parents have as much anxiety as soldiers with PTSD. I couldn't find the original paper. I hope this is helpful. I recommend reading this. Story 5. It's pretty dark how well propaganda works and how we are constantly surrounded by it. Our beliefs and behavior are manipulated by PR firms for huge corporations, and there is nothing we can do about it. Yeah, I've been entrenching myself in different communities and have realized that probably 95% of my thoughts are socially engineered. Story 6. The only reliable and recurring measures of happiness are natural predisposition, advancement of goals, improvement in circumstances. Everything else tends to either fall under one of these categories or be a blip in measurement. So yes, some people are just happier than others, and that's it. Also, no matter how good things get, everyone will always want more. This makes a certain amount of sense. If we were psychologically programmed to be happy when we had enough, then the cavemen with warm caves and enough to eat would have just stopped there and never tried rolling the round stones around. Story 7. In 2014, conservationist Damien Aspinall attempted to reintroduce a family of gorillas to a wildlife reserve. He transported the gorillas to a river island in the reserve for them to get used to the area, and then when they were ready, provided them with a bridge to access the main body of the reserve. Near the bridge nested a silverback gorilla named Bumanga, who had no partner or children. Nearby was another silverback with a large family of several wives and 20 or more children. Both of these are unusual. Gorillas normally divide mates between them. Aspinall thought that Bumanga might attempt to peel off some of the female gorillas from the newly introduced family on the island, which would be a good thing. Instead, by Aspinall's account, Bumanga crossed the bridge and beat the newly arrived female gorillas to death, dumping the bodies in the jungle and seriously battering the male of the group. This is not supposed to be a thing that gorillas do, ever. There are multiple theories about what actually happened, and Aspinall later admitted that they were never completely sure about what had happened. But if this is actually true, then Bumanga just became the first non-human incel serial killer. And if there's a natural precedent for that to happen, that puts it in a hugely different light. Story 8. A classic would be Milgram's experiments proving a lot of people would administer fatal electric shocks to others just because an authority figure instructs them to. There has been some criticism of his research, but the basic outcome could be replicated. There's a whole book on this. Milgram was under heavy political pressure to produce that type of result. It was just after WW2, and everyone was looking for an explanation of why regular Germans would have cooperated with Nazi atrocities. And a common guess was, everyone is basically an evil scumbag if they get the chance to be. Milgram's explanation was much more comfortable. He actually did a bunch of different experiments, and different ones had very different outcomes, with even slight changes to the scenario giving very different results. It's very interesting to read about as a study of how the authority effect changes in different circumstances. Story 9. The one that messes with me the most is the bystander effect. Basically, the more people witness an event that calls for intervention, accident/fight/ etc., the less likely it is someone will intervene. Having been a part of it, I can say it's real. I once was in a crowded plaza. I saw a guy kind of clutch his chest and collapse, and I admittedly kind of froze. I theoretically know first aid, CPR. By theoretically, I mean my certification had lapsed and I had never actually done it outside of a class. So I just assumed someone else who knew better would swoop in. Luckily, they did. Had I been alone on the street and saw the same thing, I fully believe I would have snapped out of it and tried to help much quicker. Story 10. I don't really know if it's psychological fact, but the whole troubled teen industry that exists to abuse kids. Many kids have died in the care of these schools through restraint and physical abuse, starvation, and medical neglect, and some other things. And others were tormented, but in wild, weird ways that sound so unbelievable that the schools were allowed to stay open, because who'd believe that a place meant to help troubled and mentally ill kids would force them into boxing rings, starve them, sexually assault them, make them dig their own graves and lay in them, telling them that's where they'd end up without the school's help, just to name a few. These schools aren't even usually run or staffed by people who have any education or experience working with kids or mental illness, but they're still allowed to exist. Some are getting better or being shut down now that people who went or worked in these places are speaking out, but others are still existing and actively harming kids, and it's terrifying to me. Story 11. Trauma is multi-generational. Most easily discernible when you look at how diet affects the following generation. Not in fetal alcohol syndrome kind of way, but in a, if the mother dieted or otherwise starved repeatedly for sustained time in the years leading up to a pregnancy, even if she ate consistently at healthy levels during the pregnancy, the child is far more likely to retain weight and have a higher difficulty losing excess fat. Monkey sees a lot of success with this gene pattern. Not enough resources, so mom is malnourished. Make a baby that is better at holding any extra nutrients. Baby grows up fat and happy and makes more babies, but these babies don't have the genetic pressure to retain nutrients since their parents had plenty. So there must be enough to go around. Rinse and repeat for 50 million years. Oof. Add that into the emotional trauma of being half-starved by family because you grew up fat and get put on a diet at 10 years old because your mom wants you to grow up hot like she was, and it's her stupid anorexia behavior that made you a fat little kid in the first place. Story 12. There's only one very small part of the brain that takes away or increases empathy. One bad knock on that part of the brain and you're a psychopath. Story 13. I lecture in biochemistry, undergrads mainly. Had an interesting debate regarding mRNA vaccines and COVID. The student was adamant the vaccines were unsafe, as we knew little about their long-term use. I appreciated their view, but posed the question, at what point do we consider a therapy safe and effective based on collated data? I happened to then talk about the difference between the mRNA vaccine and over-the-counter paracetamol. And since paracetamol has been around since the 1880s, does that make a difference? Imagine their horror when I said we have no idea why paracetamol is good for headaches. Nobody knows. It's a mystery. We don't know why anesthesia works, or why someone goes unconscious when given propofol. There will always be debates over the safety of COVID vaccines, but to equate it to paracetamol is laughable. It really is a case of saying, well, it works, that's good enough. I really hope students of mine go on to study neurochemistry. It's absolutely fascinating. It keeps me up at night, knowing it is my responsibility to inspire future scientists and researchers. Story 14. It is actually quite easy to condition children to not succeed at a very young age simply by ignoring or slandering any success or original thinking that they might have. They did an experiment with fleas where they put them in different size jars. Normally, a flea can jump about 6 feet high. It's about the equivalent of a man jumping over the Empire State Building. They raised them after they were born, and they jumped and hit the lid. And after a while, when they were let out, they only jumped as high as the lid. They also passed this genetic trait down. Story 15. If you remember it, chances are high that you remember it incorrectly. Not dark per se, but still creepy. Story 16, late to the thread, so I don't know if this was posted. In the discovery and subsequent study of learned helplessness, researchers would shock dogs in metal cages repeatedly with no escape. Once the dog started laying down during the shocks, the researchers would open the cage doors, and the dogs would stay in during the shocks, laying down. They concluded that people could learn to feel helpless even when provided a chance to escape or alleviate suffering. During repeat studies, new researchers found found that the animals were not laying down due to helplessness, but because when you increase the surface area of a shock, it reduces the pain. Story 17. If someone is having a psychotic break episode, you say something completely strange yet stupid. It will often shock them out of whatever is happening. For example, I'm having a breakdown. Did you get clearance from the city? Story 18. Very simple, but I would argue the most frightening. We are all just one bad day away from complete psychosis, meaning all bets are off on what you believe and what you are willing to do. Story 19. There are narcissists and there are damn narcissists. The difference being, a narcissist has attained some level of achievement and/or success. A damn narcissist is one who's never reached any level of success. Yet through revisionist history, gaslighting, and an overwhelming need to elevate themselves above everyone, continues to stupefy everyone with fabrication. How am I an expert on the subject? My father is the latter. 60 years of this behavior has conditioned me to spot the narcissist superior. Story 20. This year there was some big drama about 2006 Alzheimer's research being almost definitely fabricated. And it's easy to make a whole story about how our view of Alzheimer's has been built on a lie for 15 years. And yeah, a lot of time probably got wasted on doctored reports. That said, what I think is even darker is that scientific studies on the whole are usually wrong, especially psychology as it's more rapidly developing. A lot of people, I imagine, are not really stunned to hear that whatever research from whatever year is fake, because the same happens even when intentions are good. It's really, really easy for bias to affect data, and in science, there is so much force from publications to get interesting results that researchers are essentially duped into faking results without explicitly intending it. Story 21 was, I was taught many psychologists are actually mentally ill, trying to understand themselves. You know what they say, the best counsel comes from those who have experienced it. I find that pretty dark because if you're still searching for the answer, Story 22, the brain is the human's greatest strength and greatest weakness. It is terrifying what the mind can do to someone. In a basic sense, it can twist your perception of reality, which can make daily life extremely hard for some people. Story 23, it's less of a fact, and I got it from MK in one of their videos. The uncanny valley implies that at one point, humans needed the fear of something that looks human but is not. Story 24, I'm not sure about the validity of this one, but it's interesting at least. Every feeling you experience as a human that indicates a need has an often subconscious corresponding action in order to remove or otherwise treat the feeling and achieve homeostasis. Hungry? Eat. You are not hungry anymore. Have sex. You are not horny anymore. Sad? Cry, you are not sad anymore. Now, have you ever seen something extremely cute, almost to the point of getting somewhat frustrated, along with an urge to squeeze it? Some mean that this urge to squeeze something cute, like a kitten or a baby, is really the subconscious urge to kill it, because then it stops being cute. This may also be related to the theory that dogs enjoy adorable squeaky toys, because it replicates the sound of small animals dying. Fun, right? Story 25. When you talk to someone and make eye contact while you are speaking, and their pupils change while listening, they either are very attracted to you or they want to hurt, kill you. Equally both terrifying. Story 26. Dark psychology, manipulation, and gaslighting are evil acts, especially towards a loved one. Story 27. When babies crawl a certain way, like push with one foot and curl the other leg up, they are more likely to develop schizophrenia later in life. The folks who did the study came to my work. I work in mental health, and we were all a little shocked. Story 28. Not secrets, but electric shock therapy, lobotomies, neutering the mentally handicapped, that Freud and Jung were ever taken seriously. Story 29. In the event of a sudden depressurization in an airplane, mothers are more likely to put their child's mask on before their own and can perish because of this. Story 30. I remember a few because I try to use them. If you want to be confident and want to tell someone something, have them sit down as you are standing up or catch them sitting down. Tired of the ranting. Karen, stare at her mouth and say, you got something in your teeth. Nervous during an interviewer that you can't look at them. Look at the bridge of their nose and keep your back straight. It gives confidence. Want to know if someone is watching you? Pretend to yawn and look their way. If they yawn back, then they were looking at you. The easiest hack is yourself. Story 31. Calling yourself an empath is a form of narcissism. It is a form of grandiose thinking and superiority. Self-named empaths tend to take the moral high ground. We all possess the ability to empathize and have compassion. It is how we are wired. Even serial killers and sociopaths and psychopaths display empathy and acts of compassion to some degree. It is just undeveloped or a choice to limit the empathy response. Someone who feels others suffering deeply has a highly developed empathetic state. No such thing as an empath. Story 32. Evolution requires intentional selection behaviors to work. Systems of constraint most often breed their own decohering factors. Humans manage to screw both ends of this pooch simultaneously. compromising an entire set of knowledge in the process. The linked paper struggles to use the traditional models, even as neuroscience and behavioral cascade mapping in neuroanatomy are unwriting their findings almost as fast as they can publish them. Relevant contexts. Replicability crisis means bias, norm isn't, and normal increasingly being proven not to exist as such.